Once upon a time, or perhaps even twice, there was a boy named Dax. Dax was the master of a fine sailing ship, and so he was called Captain Dax. It might seem strange that such a young boy was captain of a ship, but Dax lived in a magical land where time passes differently. It is hard to say exactly how many years had passed since his birth. He might even have been as old as you. As was said, Captain Dax had his own fine sailing ship. Sometimes, as the need was present, however, he would serve as captain for another vessel. Such was the case with the ship of Theseus. Theseus was a trader, and he brought the finest foods to the islands where Dax and his magical friends lived. Theseus would travel all over the known world, and sometimes beyond it, negotiating to buy particular delicacies. Theseus was the sharpest of negotiators, always driving a hard bargain. Some said that the bargains Theseus made were perhaps too harsh. He paid as little as he could for what he bought, and sometimes he would trick the seller into a deal the vendor had not intended. But Theseus, although he was a sharp merchant, was aware of his own limitations. He was not the best of sailors, and so he enlisted Dax to sail his ship. Dax captained the vessel, and Theseus rowed aboard. Dax, for his part, was happy for the chance to command the great boat. Although Dax's own ship was by many measures both faster and finer, there was no argument but that the ship of Theseus was the largest on the seas. The giant craft was able to carry the most cargo, feeding all the lands. It was quite the adventure. "Dax," Theseus would say, "today you must sail for the tropical forest. We are going for kumquats." Dax at the tiller, the ship of Theseus would sail across the ocean, past the horizon, beyond the farthest cloud, until, at last, after a voyage of who can count so long, the ship of Theseus arrived at a tropical paradise. The thick green leaves of its foliage interrupted only by the brilliant orange of the kumquats that were grown there. Huge bushels of this fruit were loaded aboard. They looked like little oranges, little balls of taste and flavor. Dax ate one whole, peel and seeds and all. It was a little sour, but tasty and full of juice. The voyage back was harder than sailing out. Tremendous waves, as high as mountains, crashed against the ship of Theseus. The merchant was glad then that he had a captain as wise as Dax in command. Any lesser sailor would surely have sunk the ship. Still, even with Dax's skill at sailing, the ship of Theseus was badly battered. Many of the planks that made the decks and hull were cracked into splinters. Sailing back into the magical lands, Theseus's ship was still as big as it had ever been, but perhaps not so grand. On the first island they passed as they sailed back lived a centaur named Aristotle. A centaur is a creature half horse, half man. In Aristotle's case, his human half looked like that of an old man with snow-white hair. His horse's behind was a fine-fit stallion. His coat was brown, his hooves were gray. Centaurs are simple folk, but hard workers. In the magical lands, they were particularly known as shipwrights, that is, workers who repaired boats and ships. Aristotle waved to the damaged ship as it passed. "Hello, Dax. Hello, Theseus," Aristotle called. "Welcome back. I'm very hungry today. What fine foods have you brought back to us?" Theseus revealed his cargo. "Kumquats." He held up one of the small fruits, which shone in the daylight like it was its own orange little sun. "They are delicious." Dax had to agree that they were. "What can I do to obtain these tasty treats?" asked Aristotle, and the ship of Theseus pulled up to the island. I will not sell them to you, smiled Theseus in his sly way that often preceded a deal that was about to be in his advantage. But I will lend them to you if you will fix my boat, and acknowledge that whatever is carried on the ship of Theseus belongs to Theseus forever and for always. Now, this seemed like a strange bargain to Aristotle. How could one borrow food? And what would come from it, except perhaps manure? Aristotle's rear half was of a horse, and humans were known to use manure as fertilizer for their crops. He certainly did not envy Captain Dax the voyage if they were to store manure for their return voyage. Aristotle did not think too long about this. He was very hungry and could repair the ship. Aristotle made the bargain. He set immediately upon repairs. He cut down trees from his own island and fashioned boards. He carefully replaced each damaged plank until every one was new. The ship was as magnificent as it had ever been. Theseus then honored his bargain. Crates of the kumquats were unloaded in huge heaps of fruit, which Aristotle greedily devoured. The expression, "eat like a horse," is not for nothing. Soon Aristotle had consumed so many of the small fruit that his previously chestnut horse fur was turned to orange. "Aristotle is half kumquat now," joked Captain Dax as they sailed away. "Yes," said Theseus, but he did not laugh. Soon came the time for the next voyage in Theseus's ship. Dax set the sails and mapped their voyage to the land of the long white cloud. It was rumored that this place grew a fantastic plant called the kiwi. No one in the magical lands had ever seen its fruit, but they were said to look like fuzzy little animals. Inside, they were green as emeralds and flavored in a way that set taste buds dancing. Theseus had negotiated for the entire season's crop. The voyage to the land of the long white cloud was even longer and more arduous than their previous trip. Dax kept his steely gaze on the horizon and his iron hands on the ropes that held the sails. The winds were tremendous, carrying the ship at incredible speeds. The gift of speed was paid for in damage to sails. Again, any sailor with lesser merit than Dax would have certainly been left with nothing with which to sail. Even with Dax's great skill, the sheets were not invincible. When the ship of Theseus loaded the kiwis aboard, the fruits were exactly as magnificent and delicious as described. There were holes throughout the sails. By the time they completed the return voyage to the magical lands, the holes were as big as all the cloth that remained. "Hello again," called Aristotle as the ship of Theseus floated by his harbor. "What fine foods do you have at your holds this time?" Theseus used a knife to cut one of the kiwi in two, revealing its magically green interior. "Kiwi," he said, with the same devious smile that he had shown before. Dax thought that something was not quite right. He knew Theseus sometimes drove bargains that could be unfair. He did not want the hard-working and honest Aristotle to be taken advantage of, but he could not think what was wrong. Well, other than the manure, Dax certainly didn't want to be a captain commanding from the poop deck. He resolved to talk to Theseus about this later. The same deal was struck as before. Aristotle repaired the sails. He went to the silkworms, which hid in the deep forests of the island. He took their cocoons and spun the thin material into threads. The thread the centaur made into cloth. The cloth he shaped into sails. Theseus's ship was good as new, and Aristotle ate the kiwi until his hooves turned as green as the sea around them all. "I'm just lending you the food," said Theseus. "Whatever is carried on the ship of Theseus belongs to Theseus forever." Over many voyages, this pattern repeated. Aristotle turned as many colors as the rainbow. Theseus's ship had its many parts replaced as the weather and the voyages took their toll. The great masts were fixed from the tallest trunks. A crooked rudder was patched together with rubber from the shorter rubber trees. Ropes were spun from vines. Red hues appeared in Aristotle's cheeks from apples and from strawberries. His flanks were flecked with amber waves of grain. With all these colorful changes, the only thing that stayed the same was Aristotle's hair. It remained as white as snow. This seemed to annoy Theseus for some reason, but Dax didn't want to say too much. He was afraid that Theseus might remember that there was quite a bit of manure piling up that some farmer would be willing to trade for. "Whatever is carried on the ship of Theseus belongs to Theseus forever," Theseus said again. Dax puzzled for the trick hiding in this all. He wondered if Theseus perhaps meant him, the captain of the ship, when talking about what was carried on the ship of Theseus. There was a peculiar belief in some parts of the world that a person could own another person. Dax knew this to be wretched, but he wouldn't put it past Theseus to attempt such a trick. Dax thought again. He was sure that he had in no way bargained away his own freedom. One day, Theseus asked Dax, "What is Aristotle's favorite food?" "Chocolate," said Captain Dax. Chocolate was certainly a delicious flavor, after all. "Then we sail for the Candy Coast," ordered Theseus, the wheels of his mind turning in calculation. Dax could not tell if this deep thought was about the price of cocoa beans or some more sinister plan. What do you think he was up to? Dax was curious to see it through, and set sail that night. The Candy Coast was lined with thick forests of cocoa trees, which grow the beans for chocolate. The beans themselves are bitter, though, and by themselves taste far more terrible than one would expect, given the possibility that they eventually can form chocolate. To balance the bitterness, the farmers in this region also grew great fields of sugar cane and had pastures filled with milking cows. The cream and the sugar and the cocoa beans were mixed near the harbor and produced great blocks of dark brown chocolate. They were the biggest blocks of chocolate you could imagine. Great cranes loaded the chocolate bars into the hold. Tons of it, mountains of it. Huge piles of delicious chocolate were loaded into the holds of the ship of Theseus, until the hull hung low in the water. Captain Dax had to set extra sails so as to maneuver the ship away from the Candy Coast. Luckily, the voyage back was more calm than the others. Theseus' ship took no damage. Still, Theseus asked Dax to pull up to Aristotle's island and unload.
"Chocolate! I love chocolate!"
exclaimed Aristotle as he saw what was being unloaded.
"But why are you giving me this?" he asked. "Your ship requires no repairs this time."
"I'm not giving them to you, remember," smirked Theseus. "Whatever is carried on the ship of Theseus belongs to Theseus forever." Dax cried out to Theseus to wait, to consider, to contemplate the trap into which he might be falling. It was too late. Chocolate was, in fact, Aristotle's favorite food. So much so that he consumed almost the whole shipment of it at once. He ate so much, in fact, that his white hair, which had previously been impervious to any change, turned dark chocolate brown.
"That was delicious,"
said Aristotle. "I hope so," said Theseus, "because you now belong to me. You will travel with me on my future voyages and repair my ship for free." Aristotle spoke, somewhat confused.
"I cannot leave my home,"
he said.
"I tend my island, raise the plants and animals, and repair many ships besides your own. Besides, I am my own master. What claim do you have to own me?"
"Look at yourself," said Theseus, pointing out the bright colors in the centaur. "Your tail is made of my orange kumquats, your hooves of my green kiwis, and now even your hair is brown and dark from the chocolate I provided. I told you I was not giving you these things. What is carried on the ship of Theseus belongs to Theseus. I am now calling back what is mine, so you are mine." Aristotle looked so scared that it seemed his recently chocolate hair might turn again to white. Captain Dax, however, observed with a cooler and calmer disposition. He was wise beyond his tender years, and managed the ship of Theseus on stormy seas. He was confident that he could manage Theseus as well. Dax spoke up. "But these foods you speak of were not carried on the ship of Theseus," Dax said in a clear and strong voice. "Of course they were," insisted Theseus. "You steered the ship yourself, Captain Dax. You saw that the cargo was loaded and unloaded from the hold." Captain Dax shook his head in a slow and knowing no. "I sailed a ship, it's true, but it was not the ship of Theseus, not beyond the voyage and the kumquats at least." "What do you mean?" questioned Theseus. Captain Dax explained. "The boards on the deck were replaced with Aristotle's wood as soon as we pulled into port. If a person is only what his parts are made of, how much more so is this true for a ship? By now, surely every part of the vessel has been replaced. It is a new ship altogether that carried the chocolate. What is carried on another ship, that does not belong to Theseus." "But the ship is still mine." Theseus stomped his feet. "If so, then Aristotle is still his own. A person, much more than a thing, is more than the sum of its parts. There is the form of something, and its maker. There is a purpose to it, and an idea. But beyond all this, a person certainly should not be owned, regardless of the color of his hair, or tail, or hooves." Theseus hung his head, realizing that he had been beaten. "It's not a total loss, you know," said Aristotle, patting the merchant on the back. "You can still have a bit of my orange tail." "And the dung is yours," reminded Captain Dax, "although I won't be sailing to carry that cargo with you." And so Aristotle loaded the manure onto the ship, just as he had promised. Theseus waved away the flies with a bit of cut tail, a thing a horse's tail is good for. The flies still persisted for a bit, following the ship out to sea. If it was the ship of Theseus or not is a subject of some debate, but it was clear that Theseus was the one to steer it now. Captain Dax and Aristotle waved goodbye and watched the load of manure sail away. They remained, knowing surely that they were more than the sum of their parts, and always and forever their own. Thank you for listening to this story, Captain Dax and the Ship of Theseus. This story was based, in part, on an older story by another Aristotle, not the centaur, but the man. Aristotle the man was a philosopher who lived a very long time ago in Greece. He was a great teacher and sometimes used stories to illustrate his points. The Ship of Theseus was one of these stories and was meant to illustrate what makes a particular thing or person exactly what it is. Aristotle lived in a time when people still didn't understand that a human should not be owned by other people. But there were smart people who came along later who taught us that, and other things. You can learn some of these new things in other Books for Brilliant Barns and other videos on this channel. Please like, subscribe, and look for them in bookstores. Thank you again, and pleasant dreams.